So here's a surprising statistic. More than two-thirds of all successful startups report drastically changing or pivoting their original idea along the way. Twitter or X didn't start as a microblogging service, Instagram wasn't originally a photo-sharing app, and Slack, well, they started as a gaming company. The difference then between startup success and failure isn't necessarily starting with a perfect idea, it's knowing when and how to successfully pivot from your original idea or plan A to a plan that works before running out of resources. So in this video, I'm going to share how to know when it's time to pivot and, more importantly, how to do it systematically. Hi there, if you're new to this channel, my name is Maurya. I'm an entrepreneur and author and creator of the popular one-page business modeling tool Lean Canvas, used by millions of founders around the world. On this channel, I share systematic strategies and techniques for launching and growing a startup. The challenge with pivots is knowing when to pivot, and one of the first pitfalls is pivoting too quickly and too often. Here's how that typically plays out. You start on an idea and rush to build and launch something new and exciting into the world. However, most initial launches don't typically go as planned, and so when you don't get the result you expected, some initial disappointment sets in. This disappointment quickly turns into resignation until you come up with a new angle. You think of a new direction that might turn things around, and this is what most people label as a pivot, which brings me to the first misunderstanding about pivots. A pivot is not about changing direction at the first sight of failure. All ideas, even good ones like a good tea, typically require some steeping time before they start to work. So when you start changing your idea too quickly, it's easy to give up on an idea because you were too impatient. Even when you have a bad idea on your hand, if you don't know why it's bad, it's hard to come up with something better. Which brings me to the second misunderstanding about pivots. Pivots aren't about trying a bunch of random stuff. Trying a bunch of random stuff is like throwing spaghetti on the wall to see what sticks. And sure, if you throw enough spaghetti at the wall, maybe you'll get lucky and something will stick, but I think you can appreciate that this is not an optimal strategy. Most startups run out of resources before they find a breakthrough insight. The takeaway here is that breakthrough insights can't be simply guessed, they have to be learned or earned. This is where the importance of learning comes in. A pivot not grounded in learning is simply a disguised see-what-sticks strategy, which can be a recipe of going around in circles until you run out of resources. This brings me to the final misunderstanding about pivots. Pivots aren't simply about going fast. Speed of execution is often cited as a startup's unfair advantage, but simply going fast under conditions of extreme uncertainty with a flawed plan is a recipe for just getting lost faster. So speed alone isn't enough. Speed of learning is a startup's true unfair advantage. And the way to do that isn't by rushing through a failure to come up with the next solution to test, but rather slowing down to understand the root causes behind the failure. True breakthrough insights are often hidden just on the other side of these root causes. Even when a Formula One driver approaches a turn, they don't speed into the turn or they'll lose control. They first hit the brakes to slow down, then they read the turn to see the racing line, which is the optimal path through the turn. They then skillfully maneuver through the turn before accelerating out of it. Startups are no different. Now, the other extreme isn't any better. Many startup founders hold on to a bad or flawed idea for too long and think that if they just believe in their vision or idea strongly enough, with enough determination and perseverance, things will eventually turn around for them. Now, while passion and determination are certainly essential attributes to cultivate as a founder, you have to be wary of blind passion and blind determination. Racing through a fog without any data or evidence that you're heading in the right direction is also a recipe of getting lost faster. The real danger in this case is staying stuck with a flawed business model while someone else takes over the market with a slightly different business model that you could have pivoted to. Knowing when to pivot then is a classic Goldilocks problem. If you pivot too early, you might miss out on a key breakthrough insight, and if you pivot too late, you might run out of resources or worse, miss the market. So in the next section, I'll show you how to know when it's time to pivot and, more importantly, how to do it systematically. The key to determining when to pivot is building an external accountability system. The problem with relying on our own judgment for when to pivot is that it's too easy to fall into the post-rationalization trap. As we saw earlier, if you try something new and don't immediately get the outcome you expected, it's much easier to post-rationalize and move on. If, for instance, you launch your product during the summer months and it doesn't sell, you might conclude that it's because everyone is on holidays. If sales don't pick up immediately after the summer, it's because, well, they might have just returned from their holidays and might need some time to settle in. Then here in the United States, we have Halloween in October, then Thanksgiving in November, and Christmas in December, and then the New Year and a few other holidays mixed in. All these holidays conspire to distract your customers from buying your product. By this logic, it's never a good time to sell. This is exactly the post-rationalization bias at work. And while reasonably smart people can rationalize anything, I find that entrepreneurs are especially gifted at this. The antidote to this bias is establishing an external accountability system, which is also the best way to tackle pivots systematically. Here's how I build my external accountability system. I start by recruiting a few external stakeholders, working in 90-day cycles, and constantly reviewing progress. Let's walk through each of them. It's hard to objectively review your own progress because of the post-rationalization bias I talked about earlier, and so to do this well, it helps to recruit a few trusted external stakeholders who can hold you accountable and call your BS. These stakeholders could be advisors, investors, or domain experts, but they don't have to be. Sure, it's good to be surrounded with good advisors, but the key here is external accountability. When I first quit my day job to start a company, my first external stakeholder was my wife. Then I included a few other startup founders who were roughly at the same stage as I was, and we kept each other accountable. It was only over time that I recruited more seasoned advisors and domain experts and coaches for my startup. So the key here is to start small and focus first on accountability over seeking the best possible advice. With your external accountability team assembled, the next step is establishing a non-negotiable progress reviewing cadence. I have found that working in 90-day cycles works best for this. It's too easy for us entrepreneurs to fall into flow state once we start working on our ideas. This is where we lose sense of time and weeks quickly turn into months and years without us noticing. Time is the scarcest resource in a startup, and I found that the best way to hold on to time is by setting explicit and non-negotiable time boxes. Think of these time boxes as regular checkpoints or pit stops in your startup journey where you stop your Formula One race car to evaluate your progress. I find that 90 days is long enough to take on meaningful work and make measurable progress in a startup. At the early stages, 90 days is long enough to demonstrate early traction for an idea, especially if you follow a sell before you build process. It's also long enough to build and launch the first iteration of most products, what we typically call the MVP, especially if you're open to out-of-box techniques to speed up learning, like using Concierge or Wizard of Oz for testing an idea. If you're unfamiliar with these strategies or tactics and want to learn more, you can check out this video over here. And just as importantly, 90 days is also long enough to give you enough steeping time to rigorously test an idea or new campaign and not give up on it too quickly. Now, at the same time, 90 days is still short enough to drive a strong sense of urgency. A typical startup roughly takes 2 to 3 years to achieve product market fit. If we break this into 90-day cycles, you'll quickly realize that there are only 8 to 12 such cycles, which is not a lot of cycles, and so you have to make each one count. Okay, so we have got our external accountability team and 90-day cycle defined. Next, I'll cover how I review my progress in these meetings. I start first by scheduling a 45-minute meeting on my calendar with my external accountability team way in advance. That way, there are no scheduling conflicts or excuses to postpone. I kick off each meeting by giving a quick progress report, typically in 10 minutes, where I review what I thought, what I did, and what I learned over the last 90 days. I use a few key artifacts to make this more concrete, such as sharing a snapshot of a lean canvas to capture what my key beliefs looked like 90 days ago, which I contrast against any new learnings and new beliefs that I have now. I also capture my business model progress by highlighting a few key metrics on a traction roadmap, which on the surface may look a lot like a typical forecast chart, but it isn't. Unlike typical forecasts that tend to be overly optimistic because they often describe ambitious stretch goals, traction roadmaps, on the other hand, are a lot more realistic because they capture an idea's minimum, not maximum, success criteria. In other words, think of this curve as the water level on a beach. You should always aim to be above the water level, and if you're not, that should make you uncomfortable. For more on the concept of minimum success criteria and how to create traction roadmaps, you can check out this video over here. Okay, so after the quick progress update, I then spend the rest of the meeting driving toward a 3P decision. 3P here stands for persevere, pivot, or pause. If we are above our minimum success criteria curve, it means our business model is working so far, and this is the persevere case. We use the remaining time on the meeting to identify our next 90-day goal from our traction roadmap, and we pick one or more strategies or campaigns for achieving the goal. If we are below our minimum success criteria curve, this is a clear sign that our business model isn't quite working, and we need to confront a pivot or pause decision. How we do that depends on the quality of learning or key insights that we gathered during the last 90 days. For instance, if we are below our traction goal and have some evidence-based learnings for how to course correct, this usually leads in a pivot conversation. We spend the rest of the meeting discussing and prioritizing possible new strategies or campaigns to run, which we'll test in the next 90-day cycle. If we don't have good learnings, instead of rushing or forcing a pivot, we'll instead prioritize more root cause analysis or run more discovery to first gather evidence. I follow the same approach with the decision to pause or kill off an idea. I don't like to give up on things just because they aren't working. Even killing off an idea ideally requires learning why the idea is flawed so you can confidently stop it and channel your resources to something more productive. When done this way, killing off an idea is not failing as a founder, but rather eliminating dead-end paths, which is still a success in my book. The key to making a good 3P decision is constantly revisiting your key beliefs, key metrics, and key insights. And having the courage, yes, I'll call it that, the courage to separate your success as a founder from the success of your idea. Ideas are fickle and will constantly change. That's what startups are all about. So be ruthless with your ideas, but have faith in yourself as a founder. More importantly, cultivate a discipline to pursue evidence-based decision-making. That is what I find to be the high order bit when it comes to success with startups. Thanks for watching, and until next time, take care.